Hello, my lovelies. My name's Dolthalion, and the plan for today is to finally show you all of the structure that went into Aziraphale's hose. These are what I spent most of last year working on, at some points slower than others, but I got there in the end. If you weren't aware, these are based off the BBC and Amazon production of Good Omens, but my goal with them was to be as historically accurate as I could be. My main pattern was the one from the Tudor tailor, and you can see my mock-up process and how I made my shirt and hose in the playlist, which you should be able to find up here. This video is obviously a bit of a milestone on my channel, and I'm pretty pleased with where I've come. You will certainly be able to notice the difference in quality on the filming in this video as I started to figure things out. However, I'm starting to reach the limits of what I'm able to do with the funds and equipment that I have available, so I have finally gone ahead and made a coffee. If you are enjoying my videos and want to help support the channel, the link can be found in the description, and I would be so grateful for anyone who is able to donate. It sounds like a small thing, but the first thing that I'm going to buy is a hard drive. This video alone took over 100 gigabytes worth of filming, and the one that I've got is stuffed to the brim. But as I said, I appreciate you all, whether you can donate or not. I feel very lucky to have the audience that I have. You guys are all wonderful and have been wonderful to me and continue to be wonderful to me. So this is just to help me improve and grow, and hopefully you will see the benefits of that very shortly. But I know you've all been waiting for a while, so let's get to the video. Before I start, I want to show you guys what I've done to keep myself organised, because as you know, I don't have a dedicated sewing space, so I'm going to be working in bits and pieces, moving stuff around. I don't have all of the materials to hand yet, so I'm going to start cutting today, but I don't actually have all of the material. I've done a couple of things to keep myself organised. The first thing I've done is written a list of everything that I need to cut, and as I cut them, I'm going to tick them off. So that's not just each pattern piece, because obviously I've got the pattern pieces, but a list of each fabric that I need each pattern piece in. So, you know, for the panes, I need them in the fashion fabric, in the calico, and in the lining, twice of each fabric. And then that will help me keep track of what I've cut out and what I haven't. The other thing that I've done is scanned the instructions from the book and printed them out. And that's because, although I'm going to be showing this to you in order because it makes life easier for you, I'm not going to have the luxury of working in order. I'm going to have to start on what I've got and then do the next thing that I can do, and it's just generally going to be a fairly disorganised mess because that's how these things work occasionally. So I've printed it off in order that I can make notes so I can mark off what I've actually done, so that when I come to assembling it all, I know where I'm up to and what the next thing I've got to do is. I've still got the book there for reference. That's just, I know you can write in books, but I don't like to, so this is what I'm doing. So yeah, that's how I'm keeping track of things, and I'm going to get on with cutting now. To mark out my pattern pieces, I'm using pencil, and that's because this is the calico, so this is kind of an in-between layer on most of these. I can use pencil and then adjust the pattern pieces that needed to be adjusted. So for example here, I've got the foundation layers, and you can see I had to add a bit to correct the waistband on these. I've added the seam allowance on the panes, and then I've just lengthened the waistband a little bit extra as well, so I've got a little bit of play. Now, when it comes to cutting out the fashion fabric, I'm going to directly pin the calico onto the fashion fabric because they're going to be flat-lined anyway, and it's just going to make my life a lot easier. So the first batch is ready to go, so let's get to the snippy time. Trunk hose are pretty fabric hungry. Not as much as a full dress, but certainly take a good amount. Part of that is to provide structure and to protect the expensive outer layers and to keep the wearer warm in the little ice age, but a part of it was almost certainly showing off as well. And when I set out to be historically accurate, I forgot that I'm no longer in easy reach of London and the fabric district there, and pretty limited in what I can get my hands on fabric-wise. So this pair of trunk hose are made almost entirely from cotton, which while just about accessible in the time period, was mostly available in a cotton linen blend, which was used in a lot of linings on examples, but not as fashion fabric. The fashion fabrics in this case are a cotton polyester blend, which certainly wouldn't have been available, but was the best I could find for a fashion fabric. I did go for one with a low polyester content, the lowest I could find, but it is in there. The canyons and the linings are done with a grey and a blue cotton velvet respectively, and I got a cotton calico for the flat lining. I did manage to squeeze all of my lining out of the remaining fabric from the shirt, which I was pretty pleased about. And yes, I managed to forget to cut my canyons on the bias. I wouldn't have had enough fabric for that anyway without piecing, but I'm still kicking myself for it. Piecing is period, but according to tailor cutting guides from the time, the foundations could be cut on the bias or straight grain, so's the straight grain. Once I was done with cutting, I needed to mark all of my seam allowances on. I only did this on the linings and the calico since all of the fashion fabric gets flat lined. I also marked out the darts on the linings, since they'd gotten distorted from enlarging the pattern, and the ones on my mock-up had ended up a bit all over the place because of that. The first step in sewing is to roll up 2 squares of wadding into a sausage and secure them with a couple of stitches, and then set them aside for later. These are used to weigh down the bottom of the trunk hose linings, and it's surprising how much of a difference they make, even though they're not that heavy in your hand. Other methods of stuffing the trunk hose involve using rags or wool, or there's a fabulous story about a lad who filled his with bran and spent his day flirting with all the ladies, thinking they were laughing at his witty banter, not realising he'd developed a leak. Talk about spaghetti falling out your pockets. Turns out that story is as old as time. And then it was on to the panes. I didn't have any slashes to do, but they would be the first step if I was slashing this. A lot of panes were slashed, quite often with heated metal tools that burnt the edge as well, stopping it from fraying. Without that, my first job was to base them onto the calico to flatline them. Then I pinked the edges, which is completely inaccurate and unnecessary, but made me feel better about them not falling apart, which will become a theme in my inaccuracies. The edges were folded under, just once because the lining will cover them afterwards, and whip stitched into place to keep them under control while I was adding the trim. The stitches go through the seam allowance and the calico only, so they're not visible on the front. The trim is pinned and then tacked into place. I could have sewn it in with the pins in, but I find especially when hand sewing that it's nice to have the pins out of the way as you go. The trim I'm using is styled to look like a bobbin lace, which gives it plenty of places to hide little stitches to secure it in place. Lots of trunk hose were decorated with cord, often with metallic threads interwoven as well to give a bit of shine, so that's another option too. With it fully secured, I could remove the tacking stitches and then pin and whip stitch the lining into place, leaving the bottom unsecured. And that went for both the left and the right side, 18 panes in total. They were indeed a pain, and I was there for a while. Luckily, the next step is to deal with the canyons and foundations, which is a nice break. The canyons get flat lined to the foundations using a tacking stitch, and then the foundations are sewn along the outside seam. I used a back stitch, which was my go-to stitch on most of the seams in this, just because of how much weight the whole hose carry, but in this case also because of how close fitting the foundations are. Even though some of this is under more than a few layers, I really didn't want this to split. This was also the point where I discovered that the velvet is too thick to fill the seams. A lot of historical pieces left the seams unfinished, and others are just stitched into place, but I got out the pinking shears again and pinked the edges before whip stitching them down. The trunk hose lining also needed to be prepared, so stay tuned for that after this brief commercial break. First, the calico is basted to the wadding, and then I gave myself an extra step by securing it with little pad stitches across the whole length, by marking a 1-inch grid across the whole piece, and then stitching down every mark. This is, once again, because I wanted to make sure everything was secure, but I did see evidence in my research of the fashion fabric being secured down in a similar method. And while I didn't want to go through all of the layers so they'd be visible, I thought that doing the wadding and the calico was a good compromise. A lot of extant hose seem to have an open weave wool rather than wadding, and have 4 layers rather than 3, but I was glad to not have to go through an additional layer. Then I thread marked the darts so that once the velvet was against the calico, I could still see where to sew them in. The velvet is tacked on top, and then the darts were pad stitched with a matching thread to hold everything together and add a little more structure. Okay, so that is this panel completely done, this piece of the lining. So this is what it looks like with the pad stitching completed. You can see it, but obviously it's going to be inside darts, so it won't be that much of an issue. It's also less visible in real life than it is on the camera. It depends on where the light hits it as to how visible it is, because essentially what you're seeing is where the nap of the fabric is caught, more than the actual stitches. So the next step is darting, and I'm only going to dart 2 and then leave 1 and then 2 and then leave 1. So I'm leaving every third dart, and that's so that when I've got it up against the lining I can fit it exactly to it by taking out the remaining material in those darts. We've got the one that I've already prepared and the one that we're going to do together underneath. I pinned all of the darts before I started sewing to make sure that I didn't get carried away and sew in the third one. And then it was just the repetitive task of sewing them all in. I ended up using a straight stitch for them because of the bulk of material, which worked fine. The bulk isn't trimmed out of the darts because that adds to the structure of the garment. In Patterns of Fashion 3, Janet Arnold comments that the darted area on a set of leather trunk hose is as stiff as whalebone, and while that could be age, I'm pretty sure that the darts are certainly helping, and I can believe it too. You can see that they add the same sort of structure that we associate with padding and corsetry, just from sewing that thickness of material into so many darts so close together. Here is where we're up to. We have got a back piece and a front piece, which have got every 2 darts done and then 1 missed. And we have got the foundation piece, which is sewn together. Now, these 2 seams need to match here. In the pattern, it recommends sewing these together before you even start on the darts. But I want to make sure that they're evenly spaced, so I've done it beforehand. However, my maths has gone awry, to no one's surprise. This is the back piece. This piece is too long, which is what I would expect. However, the front piece, once we take off seam allowance, actually fits pretty much perfectly. So what I'm doing is what I should be doing on both of them, but just on the back piece, which is figuring out how much extra there is. This back piece is 6 centimeters too long. So those 6 centimeters need to be spread out against 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How convenient. Darts. It's almost like I planned this. It's not how I planned this. These are 2 centimeters at the moment, so I need to make these darts half the length that they were to begin with. I'm going to do those 6 darts with the 6 centimeters extra. Then I'm going to stitch the back and the front pieces together. Then I'm going to measure it up again, and any excess I will take out of these darts here. Now, on the other one, there was so little excess that I only managed to take out 1 dart, which isn't great. It means it isn't got the support that it should do. But even with 2/3 of the darts done, it still gives it enough support, especially once you've got the padding in there. So ideally, if your maths was correct, I would probably do all the ones on the front and maybe half the ones on the back, then sew them together, then check the remaining ones up against, so that if I'm slightly out my calculations, I can make sure it's done perfectly. By the book, you should attach these first and then do the darts. The reason that I'm not doing it that way is because I want this center seam to line up with the center seam on here, and if I'd done that and then measured the 6 centimeters across all 12, then it wouldn't have worked out. And I was going to do that even before I knew my maths was wrong, because I just want those 2 seams to match up. I think that's more important than making sure that the darts on the back exactly match up to the darts on the front. So anyway, these need to be 1 centimeter thick. So it's exactly the same process as what I've been doing so far. It's just pinching out these darts. So that is now pinned exactly to match all of the other darts. But rather than being that wide, I need to halve it. So I'm just going to measure, it's 1 centimeter now, and it needs to be half a centimeter. So I'm just going to put a mark in there, and then that's down to... So it's going to be guesstimation from there on, but then I'm just going to make it into what looks roughly to be a straight line. And then to measure that out on the back, I'm going to pin it again. So that's now pinned on the new seam line that I've just drawn. And I'm going to use the pins on the back to measure out so that it matches the front. And that's my new seam to sew. And I'm just going to do that for all 6 remaining, and then sew it in exactly the same way as I've sewn all the others. So now, if I've done this correctly, this bottom piece should line up. Let's see. It should go there. Yep. So that's great. That's now ready to sew. Now, as you can see, this side, which is the back side, has all of the darts sewn, giving me this lovely shape. It really stands up by itself, it's great. So I've tacked the two together, and now I'm just going to sew them together properly with a running stitch, because this isn't a seam that needs to take a lot of strain. It's going to be nice and big and baggy anyway, so it's not really going to take any strain at all. Hopefully anyone else making these will be bright enough not to sew together the top, where the pocket goes. Because as you can see, I forgot, and got to unpick it, which is a whole new level of depressing in hand stitching. The next job is to make the pocket to go in that gap, but before that, a quick commercial break. The pocket facing gets top stitched down onto the middle of the pocket. Then it's folded in half and the side seam is sewn in, leaving the gap to attach it to the trunk hose lining at the top. Once that's pressed and felled, it's folded in half so that the facing is opposite the opening, and the bottom seam is sewn and felled, and then that can be sewn into the gap that smarter people than me remember to leave at the top of the trunk hose lining. Because I'd used plain calico and peeking through was upsetting my modern sensibilities, I understitched it as well, which wasn't an ideal solution but worked well enough to keep me happy. With the pocket in and finished, I tacked down the top to the top of the foundation lining so it would stay in place while I was putting everything together. The last stages of prep are putting gathering stitches in the waistband of the trunk hose linings and in the panes. This really needs a good strong thread. I had to redo some of mine because my thread snapped when I was gathering them, and that's pretty sad. The top of the panes are going to be gathered into cartridge pleats, so the rows of stitching need to be about 12mm apart. I recommend marking the stitches on the linings in pencil before you start. And when you've managed that, all of your prep work is done, and the next stage is to assemble all of the pieces. It's all downhill from here, if 2020 doesn't suck your soul out and leave you staring out a window for 6 months. But that is a story for another video. So we're going to leave it there for today, but obviously I will be back in 2 weeks with the rest of the construction, so please stay tuned for that. I have to say, the amount of structure in these garments simply from sewing is incredible. It's something that you couldn't see from the mock-up, but as soon as I started sewing in those darts, I saw what an incredible difference they made. The sheer amount and weight of the fabric makes such a difference as well. It's such a difference from modern clothing and modern sewing, where it's all about reducing the bulk as much as possible. Seeing that was so interesting, and this kind of hands-on experience is how we learn and grow about history. So it was really exciting to get a chance to do that myself. My question for you today is, when was the last time that something you were working on took you by surprise? Fingers crossed it was a good surprise, but if not, let me know how you fixed the problem as well. I always think that surprises are how we learn in this kind of process, but they're always also the biggest block to us actually completing the process too. Thank you for watching through to the end, and as always, a huge thank you to all of my lovely, lovely subscribers. If you enjoyed this or found it helpful in any way, please think about subscribing or giving me a like, or donating to my coffee to help support the channel. Stay safe, stay sensible, and I shall see you again soon. Bye! My main pattern was... oh, I need the book for that bugger. It helps to be prepared, doesn't it?